Well, good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address. I'm Chris Ullman. And there is no doubt that the balance of power in the world is shifting from west to east. China's rise over the last 30 years has been breathtaking, and on some measures it is already the largest economy on earth. And that's a good thing. Millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, and China deserves its place at the table of world leaders. But with great power comes great responsibility. And the measure of a truly great power is how it treats its people and powers that are weaker than it is. So we should not forget Tibet and the lessons that it gives us. And we should never bow to pressure to silence the voice of dissidents in any country, here or abroad. The Press Club prides itself on being a forum for free speech, and it's in that spirit that today we welcome Dr. Lobsang Sangay, the President of the Tibetan government in exile. Will you please make him welcome?
Thank you, Chris, for the kind introduction, and once again I would like to applaud the National Press Club for hosting me the second time. And I was told in the last 4 years things have changed in Australia, especially relationship between Australia and China. But to see that Press Club of Australia is still continuing with the tradition of inviting quote-unquote splittists like me reflects your courage and your moral standing. So as you know, we have Chris standing here. I just watched his program this morning, Four Corners, and then I thought maybe I should speak based on your program as to what happened to Tibet, so trying to draw a parallel. Let me start with the premises that if you want to understand China, where everybody wants to understand China, especially Australia, then you have to understand Tibetan narrative. If you don't understand Tibetan narrative, to put it other way, you won't understand China. So what's happening in Australia or in various parts of the world happened in Tibet in 1950s. So let me begin with the main discourse in the international forum about one belt, one road. Whether it's good for Australia, good for the world or not, lot is being discussed. So if you understand the Tibetan story, Chinese government at that time also started building road, a first ever highway in Tibet. Now we were promised peace and prosperity with the highway. And our parents and grandparents joined in building the road. In fact, they were paid silver coins to help them build road. So there was a popular song during those days. It goes like this: Chinese are like our parents. When they come, they shower you with silver coins. So my parents told me the Chinese PLA soldiers with guns were so polite, so nice. The kids used to taunt them and haunt them. They always smile. They never say anything. Then they built the road. Once the road reached Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet, first trucks came, then guns came, then tanks came. Soon, Tibet was occupied. So it started with the road. Then another strategy that they deployed was divide and rule, co-opting our ruling elite. So among the aristocratic ruling elite, vast majority, 90+%, were against the invasion of Chinese military of Tibet. But few were co-opted. They were paid, I think in Australian context, huge consultation fees. And some of the business leaders were also co-opted. Amazingly, there is an aberration in the Tibetan Buddhist history. One High Lama also in some way sided with the Chinese army and the propaganda. One Lama believed that when Chinese army come to Tibet, it will bring peace and prosperity for the Tibetan people. So soon thereafter, there were a few other lamas who were forced to, like Penshin Rinpoche and Baba Pinzo Wangel and all that. They, in a way, they bought the ideology, not that they were bought with money. But after the occupation of Tibet, late Penshin Lama had to spend more than a decade in prison. Baba Pinzo Wangel, he spent more than a decade in prison. They bought the ideology of Chinese Communist Party and sided with the Chinese government. But they spent in prison later. Even the Lama, all of them who supported the Chinese army and the government at that time, they had big problem in their life. So Baba Pinzo Wangel, in his autobiography, he said that he forgot to speak. He forgot to talk because he was kept in solitary confinement for so long that he barely could speak. He could not utter a word, even though he was a scholar, he was a writer. So this is the consequences of what happened to Tibet in 1950s. So what you see in Australia, around the world, cooptation of ruling elite, getting high consultation fees, business leaders supporting the Chinese line of argument, and even the religious figures, we have seen all that in Tibet. So it started with the road. So, and then nowadays there's a lot of talk about, in South China Sea, East China Sea, the airports, airfields are built. What's happening? What's it for? Again, if you visit Tibet history, Tibet experience, there are 5 major airfields in Tibet. We have seen that also. And we have seen the railway. So all this has integrated Tibet and Tibetan people into the Chinese fold. Now, the Chinese government propaganda is that Tibet was peacefully liberated. And Tibetan people welcome the Chinese army. But this is the definition of peace. Nearly 1 million people have died under various forms. They have died of famine, they died in prison, they died in labor camps, more than 1 million. 98% of monasteries and nunneries were destroyed. 99.9% of monks and nuns were destroyed. From the very beginning, the Chinese Communist Party's agenda was to make Tibet into China and Tibetan into Chinese. So they thought they succeeded. When you destroy 98% of monasteries and nunneries, 99.9% of monks and nuns are gone. In 60s, if you had gone to Tibet, you would see Tibetans wearing Mao Zedong's jacket.
North of South Australia in the early 1940s. One morning, as he and the other
We have a very important guest today. We have a very important guest today, Dr. Lobsang Sangay, who's Tibet's first democratically elected political leader, and it's his second visit to the press club, and we welcome him here today. His speech is entitled Tibet and Australia, How Can Democracy Survive a Rising China? Chris Yeoman has shown some interest in the issue of China and Asia of late. He'll be our president today, and he'll be the moderator for today's event. There's an event tomorrow. Tara Moss, who's an author, journalist, TV documentary presenter, and an anti-cyberbullying campaigner, so it's well attended tomorrow. So if you're interested in that particular issue, you can still probably book online. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a mobile phone, I'd just be grateful if you have a look at it. To silent would be handy. I'd be very grateful that if you would please put it to silent during the address. Those few words of welcome will be underway very shortly. I'll ask Chris and our distinguished guest speaker to make their way forward, and we'll be underway right on 12:30. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, folks.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address. I'm Chris Yeoman. And there is no doubt that the balance of power in the world is shifting from west to east. China's rise over the last 30 years has been breathtaking, and on some measures it is already the largest economy on earth. And that's a good thing. Millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, and China deserves its place at the table of world leaders. But with great power comes great responsibility. And the measure of a truly great power is how it treats its people and powers that are weaker than it is. So we should not forget Tibet and the lessons that it gives us. And we should never bow to pressure to silence the voice of dissidents in any country, here or abroad. The Press Club prides itself on being a forum for free speech, and it's in that spirit that today we welcome Dr. Lobsang Sangay, the President of the Tibetan government in exile. Will you please make him welcome?
Thank you, Chris, for the kind introduction, and once again I would like to applaud the National Press Club for hosting me the second time. And I was told in the last 4 years things have changed in Australia, especially relationship between Australia and China. But to see that the Press Club of Australia is still continuing with the tradition of inviting quote-unquote splittists like me reflects your courage and your moral standing. So as you know, we have Chris standing here. I just watched his program this morning, Four Corners, and then I thought maybe I should speak based on your program as to what happened to Tibet, so trying to draw a parallel. Let me start with the premises that if you want to understand China, where everybody wants to understand China, especially Australia, then you have to understand Tibetan narrative. If you don't understand Tibetan narrative, to put it other way, you won't understand China. So what's happening in Australia or in various parts of the world happened in Tibet in 1950s. So let me begin with the main discourse in the International Forum about One Belt, One Road. Whether it's good for Australia, good for the world or not, it's lot is being discussed. So if you understand the Tibetan story, Chinese government at that time also started building road, a first ever highway in Tibet. Now we were promised peace and prosperity with the highway. And our parents and grandparents joined in building the road. In fact, they were paid silver coins to help them build the road. So there was a popular song during those days. It goes like this: Chinese are like our parents. When they come, they shower you with silver coins. So my parents told me the Chinese PLA soldiers with guns were so polite, so nice. The kids used to taunt them and haunt them. They always smile. They never say anything. Then they built the road. Once the road reached Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet, first trucks came, then guns came, then tanks came. Soon, Tibet was occupied. So it started with the road. Then another strategy that they deployed was divide and rule, co-opting our ruling elite. So among the aristocratic ruling elite, vast majority, 90+%, were against the invasion of Chinese military of Tibet. But few were co-opted. They were paid, I think in Australian context, huge consultation fees. And some of the business leaders were also co-opted. Amazingly, there is an aberration in the Tibetan Buddhist history. One High Lama also in some way sided with the Chinese army and the propaganda. One Lama believed that when Chinese army come to Tibet, it will bring peace and prosperity for the Tibetan people. So soon thereafter, there were few other lamas who were forced to, like Penshin Rinpoche and Baba Pinzo Wangel and all that. They, in a way, they bought the ideology, not that they were bought with money. But after the occupation of Tibet, late Penshin Lama had to spend more than a decade in prison. Baba Pinzo Wangel, he spent more than a decade in prison. They bought the ideology of Chinese Communist Party and sided with the Chinese government. But they spent in prison later. Even the Lama, all of them who supported the Chinese army and the government at that time, they had big problem in their life. So Baba Pinzo Wangel, in his autobiography, he said that he forgot to speak. He forgot to talk because he was kept in solitary confinement for so long that he barely could speak. He could not utter a word, even though he was a scholar, he was a writer. So this is the consequences of what happened to Tibet in 1950s. So what you see in Australia, around the world, co-optation of ruling elite, getting high consultation fees, business leaders supporting the Chinese line of argument, and even the religious figures, we have seen all that in Tibet. So it started with the road. So, and then nowadays there's a lot of talk about, in South China Sea, East China Sea, the airports, airfields are built. What's happening? What is it for? Again, if you visit Tibet history, Tibet experience, there are 5 major airfields in Tibet. We have seen that also. And we have seen the railway. So all this has integrated Tibet and Tibetan people into the Chinese fold. Now, the Chinese government propaganda is that Tibet was peacefully liberated. And Tibetan people welcome the Chinese army. But this is the definition of peace. Nearly 1 million people have died under various forms. They have died of famine, they died in prison, they died in labor camps, more than 1 million. 98% of monasteries and nunneries were destroyed. 99.9% of monks and nuns were destroyed. From the very beginning, the Chinese Communist Party's agenda was to make Tibet into China and Tibetan into Chinese. So they thought they succeeded. When you destroy 98% of monasteries and nunneries, 99.9% of monks and nuns are gone. In 60s, if you had gone to Tibet, you would see Tibetans wearing Mao Zedong's jacket. So it looked like China. They had no religion, which means from the very beginning, they wanted to destroy the very foundation of Tibetan civilization, Tibetan culture, thereby Tibetan identity. So that was the consequences of One Belt, One Road in Tibet. That was the consequences of peace and prosperity of the Tibetan people. So you see, it's being played out all over the world. A few years ago, I was giving a talk in Mysore University. Two students of African region asked me, can you make sense of what's happening in Africa as far as the Chinese investment is concerned? And I said, did they build good road? They said, yes. Did they build big entertainment centers? Yes. So are your ruling elite being co-opted? Yes. They said, how do you know my country? I said, it happened in Tibet, 1950s. It's the same template. It's the same blueprint being repeated all over the world. So as a Tibetan, my job here at the press club is to say, it happened to Tibet. You could be next. And we've been saying this for 50 now, almost 60 years. What happened to us could happen to you. Now in 1950s, when Tibet was occupied, all the neighboring countries, and I must add, including Australia, said, well, it happened to you. It's sad, we are very sorry, but good luck to you. It's true. But it will never happen to us. Now the whole discourse in Australia, around the world is, what's happening? Chinese investment is right here. Chinese businessmen are right here. Chinese military is right here. All the neighboring countries are asking, and in Hong Kong and Taiwan, in some places they say, we don't want to be like Tibet. Tibet has become the reference point. So I'm glad people in Hong Kong and Taiwan are mentioning Tibet as a reference point. But it's very important that you know what happened to Tibet. Unless you know what happened to us, if you study more, you will be better prepared in dealing with the Chinese government and China. Now, like Australia, Tibet is rich in mineral resources, 123 different kinds of minerals, gold, borax, copper, you name it. There are 123 different kinds and billions of dollars worth of minerals. And as far as copper mining is concerned, Zomda is the second largest in China. Some say also in Asia. It's that rich. Now the exploitation of mineral resources are going on in Tibet. And environmentally speaking, Tibet is not just for 6 million Tibetans. Tibet is vital for Asia. There, I think all the neighboring countries, including Australia, should pay attention to. Because Tibet is called the third pole. After Antarctica and Arctic, Tibet has the third highest reserve of ice. The difference is that in Antarctica and Arctic, when the ice melts, nowadays there's headline news, there's a huge chunk of ice is breaking away. But it goes to the ocean. But as far as Tibetan snow or the Tibetan glaciers are concerned, there are 46,000 glaciers on Tibetan Plateau. When they melt, it forms into streams and rivers. Hence, Tibet is vital as a source of fresh water. And 1.4 billion people are depending on fresh water flowing from Tibet. Now, Indus River and Satluj River, which starts from Tibet, goes through Kashmir to Pakistan. Brahmaputra River, the lifeline of Bangladesh and northeastern states of India, starts from Tibet. Irrawaddy River, Mekong River, they all flow from Tibet. Mekong River, we all know about Vietnam and Mekong Delta. All the ASEAN countries, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, all survive on water flowing from Tibet. Also, Yangtze River, we all have heard about 3 gorgeous dams, the biggest dams in the world. It starts from Tibet. Yellow River, the cradle of Chinese civilization, it starts from Tibet. So Tibet is rich in water resources. Now, the challenges are as follows. China has 19% of the world population, but only 12% of fresh water, which means already more than 400 million Chinese are facing scarcity of fresh water. Now, when you're sitting on water tower of the world, that's Tibet, what would you like to do if you don't have water at your home, you would like to take it from the water flowing from your site to the neighbor. So hence, diversion of rivers are likely to take place. Now, situation in India is worse as far as scarcity of water is concerned. Bangladesh, Pakistan, you name it. So some people say water is also white gold. Some experts say before wars were fought over land. Nowadays wars are fought over oil. Hence you see in Iraq and Syria and all the Middle East countries. Soon war will be fought over water. And Tibet is the source of water for whole of Asia. Now the problem is with industrialization, by which I mean to say the exploitation of minerals in Tibet, cutting down of trees, urbanization of Tibetan area, and exploitation of hydropower. What's happening is that, and then the biggest threat is population transfer of Chinese to Tibetan area. The Tibetan plateau is heating up. Now, environmentalists, including Chinese scientists, have said, if there is 1 degree increase in temperature in the rest of the world, it doubles in Tibet. The consequences are disastrous because as far as environmentalists, including Chinese environmentalists, 50% of Tibetan glaciers have already gone in the last 100 years. By 2100, the remaining 46,000 glaciers, another 50% will be gone as far as NASA is concerned. So what happens if the water tower of Asia, all the glaciers are gone? How will 1.4 billion people who are depending on fresh water from Tibet live and survive? So this is a real crisis. And also, Tibet is also called the freezer or refrigerator of the world because its Tibetan plateau is very high. It has the cooling effect. Now, when it heats up, jet stream over Tibet affects weather and climate all the way to Latin America. Now, this year is predicted as the hottest year. Hence, there's a heat wave in Europe, heat wave in northeast of China, all because of heating of the Tibetan plateau. So Tibetan plateau is vital for climate all over the world, including in Australia. Now, Chinese environmentalists have said that we should convert Tibet into a third pole national park because Tibetan plateau is so fragile, ecosystem is so delicate. We have to protect it, we have to preserve it for the sake of humanity, for the sake of China and Chinese people, for the sake of Asia. So it's time that the Chinese leaders listen to their own environmentalists, read their reports, and know that the urbanization of Tibet, industrialization of Tibet, the moving of Chinese to Tibetan areas is harming the delicate nature of Tibetan plateau, thereby in the long run and short run also, they're harming themselves. So as far as Tibet is concerned, it's vital for China and for Asia. And so I hope, Chinese leaders will listen to Chinese scientists and environmentalists, and I hope Australian leaders and people also listen to Chinese environmentalist scientists, not the splitters who are standing here. Now today, the topic is also about future of democracy. If I make a few points. In this day and age, now world has become more complex in the last 4 years. There's a decline of internationalism, there's decline of liberalism, and rise of ultranationalism and extremism around the world. So this is a very complex world. And democracy is also challenged now. And what we see in China is the Chinese model of development without democracy. And the Australian model, or the Western model, is democracy, development with democracy. As far as Tibetans are concerned, even though we are in exile, we lost our country in 1950s. There's 150,000 Tibetans scattered in 40 countries, including in this good country of Australia. But as per His Holiness Dalai Lama's vision, even though we are in exile, we follow democracy. But philosophically speaking, there is inherent contradiction between exile and democracy. Because once you're in exile, because you lost your country or freedom, you're in exile. You have one goal, one voice, or one aspiration, and one leader. Because you want to go back, you have a leader, and there has to be one voice. The unity is very important. But democracy essentially, instead of one voice, there has to be diversity. Instead of one leader, there has to be opposition parties. So there is inherent contradiction between democracy and exile. So hence, among the 60 million refugees and diaspora around the world, there are different organizations around the world. I think Tibetan administration is the only democratic organization. Even the ANC in Africa or Indian freedom movement were not as democratic as we are, because my position is directly elected by Tibetans around the world. So this is, in some ways, is a lab, it's a test where democracy is implemented by Tibetan refugees, people in exile, 40 countries. So compared to, we have a prominent member of parliament here who is a long-time supporter of Tibet. But compared to any politician, my election is more cumbersome, because as a politician, if you're a member of parliament, you have to run in a constituency, governor, you have to run in a state, or a prime minister, you run a nationwide election. I have to run cross-continent-wise, from Australia to America to Europe to Asia. So nonetheless, we implement this. We embrace democracy because we believe in universality of democracy. We take pride in democracy. So I just won my re-election in 2016. And Tibetans around the world, including Canberra and Australia, voted, took part. And then our democracy system is also quite serious. Unless you pay, it's an oxymoron, your freedom tax. So you have to pay, it's a freedom for your freedom, but you have to pay your tax. Unless you pay your freedom tax, you cannot vote. Now, compared to 2011 to 2016, or compared to 2006, in the last 10 years, number of Tibetans who are voting in election has doubled. This is the good news. So normally the voters decrease. Ours year has doubled. That means double the number of Tibetans are paying their freedom tax to participate in election. Isn't that amazing? So in that sense, I can say, well, I have the mandate of the Tibetan people, a democratic mandate, whereas Chinese leaders or officials in Tibetan areas, they don't have the democratic mandate. Now, oddly, when I come to Canberra, so we have good folks like, member of parliament here and other few, I'll be seeing them tomorrow. But then many are not moral or courageous enough to meet with me. But then they would gladly meet with Chinese officials. They are not elected, I'm elected. I have the democratic mandate. Well, they have the Communist Party's mandate, but they won't. So hence, the bigger question facing Australia and rest of the world is, how should we look at democracy? Australia cannot simply say, well, we are democratic because we go through a democratic process, but you have to stand up for the democratic principles and values. Unless you stand up, you cannot say, my election is democratic, but there's another question where those campaign fund comes from, right? That's another topic altogether. But you cannot say then, other than that, I am not going to do anything for democracy around the world. Silence is complicit. So either you are with or for democracy, or you are not. The choices are very clear. So when Australia fought for its independence, at one time it was also a colony, it fought on the values of democracy, it fought on the values of freedom and justice. So I'm here appealing to Australian people and Australian leaders. We are saying exactly the same thing that you said when you were a colony. You got help from other countries and other people. That freed you. That made you who you are. And time has come where you have to stand up for those principles. Now, as far as Tibetans are concerned, our attitude is very simple. I was asked by Tim and others this morning, what would you say to all those politicians who would not meet with me? Well, I like the Australian saying, no worries. So if you meet with us, we welcome you. If you don't meet up with us, we have no problem whatsoever. But it reflects more of you than me. My job is to come here and say, look, this is the democratic mandate I have as per the vision of His Holiness Dalai Lama. I'm here to simply say, I lost my country in 1950s. What happened to us could happen to you. Now people are realizing that. And then if you want to know more deeply, if you want to have deeper discussion, then I'm here to discuss with you and share my experience with you because it will help you and it will help us. So this is the reason why I'm here. This is the challenge. So whether China will be democratic or not is the biggest challenge. I think Deng Xiaoping himself said that China will be democratic in 50 years, right? And Wen Jiabao, the Chinese Prime Minister himself said, ultimately China has to be democratic. Well, I think Australian leaders and people can remind Chinese leaders, well, your paramount leader, Deng Xiaoping himself said China will be democratic in 50 years. We are inching towards 50 years. I think if you cannot quote your own constitution and principles, you can quote Chinese leaders and say, hey, when is it likely to happen? I'm just telling you what I read about your leaders. That much I think one should do. And as far as Tibet issue is concerned, with this I'll conclude here. What we seek is, again, very reasonable. As far as His Holiness Dalai Lama is concerned, he has come out with a win-win proposition. That is to seek genuine autonomy as per the Chinese laws, as per the Chinese constitution. It's called Tibet Autonomous Region. Only on paper, it's not autonomous. So what we seek is genuine autonomy as per the Chinese constitution, as per Chinese laws. Essentially what we are saying is if the Chinese government implement their own laws, we could take that as genuine autonomy. Now that's as reasonable as one can be. And Chinese government always says, well, sovereignty of China cannot be compromised. Territorial integrity of China cannot be compromised. One China cannot be compromised. It's non-negotiable. And His Holiness Dalai Lama and Tibetan people are saying, agreed. Just give us autonomy as per your laws. Now, good thing is we are not alone. US government has also supported middle way approach. President Barack Obama has met with His Holiness Dalai Lama 4 times, but in 2014 and 2016, White House has issued statement applauding and supporting middle way approach. So America stands for one China, but America also stands for middle way approach. So it's just natural for me to expect the Australian government will also say, we are for one China, we are also for middle way approach, because there is no contradiction between the two. It's just a matter of your principle. Just this morning, someone asked me, is it the fear of Chinese influence that's preventing Australian leaders or people from speaking out? And say, yes, fear is something, it's instilled in you when you submit to that fear. When you don't submit to the fear, no matter how powerful, how big the bully is, it doesn't create fear in you. But I think it's more of the greed also that's making Chinese government or the Communist Party influential in Australia and around the world. Unfortunately, that greed also led some of our ruling elite in Tibet in 1950s bought that argument that there will be actual peace and prosperity in Tibet. And now, 60 years hence, let me conclude by citing report of Freedom House and Reporters Without Borders. Freedom House comes out with annual report on Freedom Index. 2 years ago, they listed Tibet just above Syria. It's the second last country as far as freedom is concerned. Now, we all know about Syria, how bad the situation is. But the second worst is Tibet. Not many people know this. Now, Reporters Without Borders, they also come up with a report as to accessibility of the particular region or country for journalists. Now, Reporters Without Borders concluded that it's more difficult to get into Tibet than North Korea. Now, everybody knows about North Korea. Now, how many people in Australia know that it's more difficult to get into North Korea? This is the situation in Tibet. So there's political repression, environmental destruction, cultural assimilation, and social discrimination in occupied Tibet. But our solution is middle way approach, which is supported by the US government, and our means to gain that is nonviolence. So I think we are the antidote to this decline of internationalism and liberalism and rise of ultranationalism and extremism. For the last 60 years, we have a perfect record of standing up for democratic principles and nonviolence as the means. So instead of supporting us, some leaders are shying away, but no worries. We will continue to fight the good fight, and we will get there with good folks like you and all those people who are watching, and we will be with the Tibetan cause. So the Tibetan march will not be a long march like Mao Zedong. It will be a short march of justice, short march for democracy. Sooner than later, it will prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The only concern I had there is when you called in our mutual friend Michael Danby and then spoke of a freedom tax that he might go back and tell Bill Shorten about this. Bill Shorten's very keen on taxing at the moment, and this is a new one that he hasn't heard of. But we'll go to our questions from the floor from journalists in a moment. But in what you say about China, and you say that former leaders have said that it is on the path to democracy, you've seen Xi Jinping. Do you believe that Xi Jinping is on a path towards or away from democracy?
In his first term, I think he's away from democracy. I think he's consolidating his position. I think he has created all the titles there can be created and all the committees, and he is president of all the committees. So he is the most powerful Chinese leader in recent decades. Now you can compare his power and stature with Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. That's what he wants. And there's increasing repression all over China, and particularly in Tibet as well. So in Tibet, they have imposed what we call grid system, whereby all the nomads and farmers in remote areas are issued ID card with second-generation biometric chips in it, which means once you swipe it, they will track you down. So, and then if you go to Lhasa, the capital city, now, recently I just met some people from Lhasa. Every 30 meters, there's a police checkpost with a couple of fire extinguisher and a couple of buckets of water. Because as you might have read, that 149 Tibetans have burned themselves. They have committed self-immolation. Now that's since 2011, and except for one in 2009, all since 2011, which is a very sad and tragic way of demonstrating. But what it also shows, if you look at the genesis self-immolation, it has direct bearing on the Chinese prison system. If you have peaceful protest, if one or two Tibetans says human rights in the streets, they get arrested, they're put in prison for a long time, and they're tortured so severely, they die in prison. By the time they're released, they will be as good as dead. And we know the case of Nobel Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobao. Everybody knew he had cancer. The Chinese authorities waited till it was so late that he cannot be helped. Even the German doctors recommended that he be airlifted to Germany and at least try, Even then, Chinese authorities refused. Even the ashes was thrown in the ocean, so because there's no symbol of a graveyard where people could gather. They want to not just destroy him, but destroy his symbol also. So similarly, Tibetan political prisoners face similar consequences. Hence, they calculated, if I protest, I'm going to die anyways. And why suffer for so long? Why not burn myself and die? So that's 149 Tibetans have burned themselves. Now, CTA, Tibetan administration, we categorically and consistently discourage self-immolation. As a Buddhist, we say life is precious. One should live and protest. But this is the conclusion Tibetans have drawn. So hence, since Xi Jinping's taking over, repression has increased in all over China, particularly in Tibetan areas as well. Hopefully in second term, he will be like his father. His father, Xi Dongshun, was the most liberal leader supporting Hu Yaobang, the most liberal leader in China. So till Hu Yaobang lost his power, Xi Dongshun, his father, was standing right next to him. So even though his father also had to undergo house arrest. So hopefully his father's gene and brain will influence the son. Then we will see something in the second term. Otherwise, at the moment, it points towards opposite direction of democracy.
Our next question is from Fairfax.
Thank you for your remarks. Peter Harcher from the Sydney Morning Herald. You've painted a troubling picture where Chinese investment is a precursor to Chinese takeover of foreign countries, potentially including Australia. Why is this necessarily the model and the precedent? For example, we have seen other models. We have seen in the 1980s, an enormous wave of Japanese investment into Australia that caused a tremendous degree of fear, even some panic, that it was a loss of sovereignty on an enormous scale. We saw federal investment laws changed to try and head off the threat. It turned out to be completely misplaced. The Japanese boom ended. The Japanese investors sold their assets and left behind nothing more than assets and a lot of money in the hands of Australian sellers. Why must it be a precursor to Chinese takeover? Why can it excuse me, not simply be another boom which will end in another retraction?
Everybody has read the book by Professor Israel Vogel, Japan #1, which became a bestseller in 1980s. And Soviet Union was also at one time touted as going to be #1, take over the world. All this did not happen. But I think the Chinese model is a little different. I think One Belt, One Road, their pronounced goal and strategy itself revealed that. And I think if you go back to history also, the term for China, or in Chinese language, is Tungo, which means Middle Kingdom. So they are the middle of the world. By extension, Tibetans and all the people in the neighboring areas were barbarians. So the one narrative that the Chinese government used in 1950s in occupying Tibet was they want to civilize Tibet. They want to liberate Tibet. So actually they think they are the center of the universe, and Han chauvinism or superior complex is so good that they will go to Tibet and they will civilize Tibetan people. By that extension, Australia, although it's far away from China, and you all are barbarians also, so we are in the same boat. So hence the civilizational mode is extended all over the world. So you fit in that narrative. So they are the center of the universe. Number two, if you read the textbook of Chinese school, they were taught that for 2,000 years, China was the greatest civilization. And in the last just 100 years, they were victimized. They were humiliated by Western power. So 100 years is an aberration. Now, their time has come to be #1 again and dominate the world and civilize the whole world. So that's their mindset. So 100 years of aberration or humiliation means they have the victim mindset. Once you have a victim mindset, it comes out either through vengeance or inferior complex or insecurity. Now, you don't see Chinese leaders as inferior when you compare to Australian leaders. They look like bold and courageous enough to stand up for things. So hence, the term Tungo will reveal the historical part and the mindset of Chinese mindset being a victim of last 100 years and hence coming out in the form of vengeance. So in that sense, so it won't simply be that let's do business and let's prosper together and have a happy world. They want to see a world through their point of view, and they want to define the narrative of the world as well.
The ABC.
Dr. Sangay, Sabra Lane from the ABC's program AM. Thank you very much for your speech. I presume that you've tried to get a number of meetings with ministers in the federal government and that I'm not sure what excuses they've given for not meeting with you. But if you did have an opportunity to have 15 minutes with the Prime Minister today, what would your advice be to him on how the Australian government could best help you not be a government in exile?
The same thing that I said before. American government support middle way approach, at the same time support, one China policy. There's no contradiction between the two. This is, just a common sense. If Australia wants to, they could. So that will be my appeal and request to him. And by the way, last time when I came, there was also a bit of a media talk as to whether I'll meet then Foreign Minister of Australia, Bob Carr. Obviously, he did not meet formally, but Michael Danby will know after visiting his office. To visit him, I took the elevator in the Parliament. As the elevator door opened, Bob Carr entered. So it was a karmic meeting. It was a karmic meeting. So one can avoid you politically, but karma will make you meet. Now, at that time, I could have done few things. I was introduced as Tibetan President and Foreign Minister Bob Carr. I could have extended my hand and shaken his hand. That's a normal thing to do. But I hesitated. I did not. Because if he doesn't want to, then I should not put him in an odd position, even though it's at the elevator, right? But later I thought, thank goodness I didn't shake his hand, but otherwise his consultation fees could have gone down, And then also in the same corridor, when I was coming back in the evening, the group of people coming, and obviously when there's only two groups facing each other, you smile at each other. Suddenly someone ran and whispered to that lady, and she frowned. And I also said, okay, no worries. She was the Prime Minister of Australia then. So I did put her in an awkward position also, So because now the Australian former ministers are becoming consultants after consultants, 99 years lease and company, things like that, right? I have to be very careful. I don't want to earn bad karma because, after all, I have to die. So I want to earn good karma. No one consultation fees should go down because of shaking hands with me. So Michael Danby is not worried about his consultation fees. He's willingly coming, so.
Radio 2CC.
Mr. President, Tim Shaw from Radio 2CC in Canberra. Thank you so much for your presentation today. Many Chinese students enjoy the freedoms of Australian universities, and they go on to contribute greatly, not only in Australia, but also back in China. A future leader of China may be here studying in Australia at the moment. But presently, Chinese students here in Australia have the freedom of our democracy. In fact, they protest under the Chinese flag sometimes here in Australia. My question to you, if you could speak to Chinese students here in Australia, what would your message be? Because that future leader may be listening to you today.
First, I will say tomorrow I'll be speaking at ANU, and all of them should come listen to me. But I'm pretty sure 99.9% will not show up because they think they'll be monitored by Chinese embassy, which is very likely. But it all depends. Of course, Australia is a land of freedom, land of democracy. They all come and study. I've heard this argument even in America. Oh, the more number of Chinese students come to America, they will learn about American democracy. They will be influenced when they go back. They'll be more liberal. But it all depends, who your teachers are. If you self-censor yourself in the classroom, they won't learn much. Because, now, including Australia, there are a lot of bilateral dialogue on human rights. Australia and China, America. So there's a lot of human rights dialogue is going on. Now, what it has done is, instead of having Tibet issue discussed out in the public, it's discussed privately. So whenever I meet someone from the foreign ministry, they say, no, we have human rights dialogue, we should keep it quiet. But then I often ask them, who are these people? Oh, they're American-trained Chinese officials. So they know the know-how of and the jargon of human rights and democracy. They give it back to you without improving anything in China, right? So the situation has gone from bad to worse in Tibet in the last 10 years. The bilateral dialogue on human rights has been going on for 10 years. The result is net negative. So even in classrooms, if teachers don't share and actually expose them and challenge them on Australian values and Australian democracy, they won't learn much. In fact, they will learn the technicalities and give it back to you when you enter in that boardroom to discuss on human rights situation in China. I hope Chinese students will come and really learn and embrace Australian values and democracy and go back and advocate. But at the moment, I think Chinese students will not likely to do that, because the case in point is Nobel Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobao. He's a great man. He stood up for basic freedom for all the Chinese people, Charter 08. It's a good model for China. I think it's good, because China wants to be superpower in the whole world. But you can buy power, you can force people, with an element of fear. But if you truly want to be a great superpower, you have to earn respect. And you earn respect only by respecting Tibetan people. You have to showcase respect. If you don't show it, if you don't implement it, if you don't practice it, others will not respect you. So hence, you will not be a superpower. So Chinese students should know that. If you want greatness of your country or of your people, you should show greatness, not by buying, not by forcing simply, but by actually doing great things, including giving basic freedom to Tibetan people. So I hope that's what they learn here in Australia.
Canberra IQ.
Simon Groves, Canberra IQ. I've taken a cultural comparison approach to thinking about a question for you today, and I'm thinking about the issue that's top of our democracy's agenda at the moment, that's same-sex marriage. So I thought I'd look at what the marriage situation is in Tibet, and I find there are 7 forms of marriage in Tibet. There's fraternal polyandry, that's a set of brothers marries one woman. Father and son polyandry, unrelated male polyandry. Then there's sororal polygyny, a set of sisters marries one man. Mother and daughter polygyny, and unrelated polygyny, and monogamy. Now, only one of those would be legal in Australia. Is legal in Australia. I'm wondering, what is the real world situation in Tibet? Homosexual people, whether they be individuals or couples, do they live happily in society? Are they respected? If your government came into power, would you quote, legalise same-sex marriage? And if, I'm not going too far, of all those 7 models, which one do you follow?
Yeah, I was born and brought up in India, so I'm following monogamy, actually, yes. But having said that, I have no objection to same-sex marriage or transgender marriage. In fact, one of the recent celebrity in Exile Tibetan community is transgender by the name of Mariko. She was a monk, and then now has come out openly as a transgender. Now she is invited to all the Tibetan events. She's paid to, she dances and she sings very well. She has become a celebrity. So that shows Tibetans are not that conservative. When a transgender who comes out open and is traveling around exile community and who's paid to come and be in the society reflects Tibetans are quite liberal-minded. Now, polyandry and polygamy that you talk about is the rugged mountains of Tibet, because you have piece of land and you don't want to divide the land, and 2 brothers and 3 brothers keeping the family land together. That's why one does business and one is a nomad up in the mountains and one stays home. So this is the arrangement that was in the traditional Tibet. So, but that has changed. But also, there are this thing. In fact, two women having one husband is also there. So, it's part of that, being a nomadic agricultural area. So that was the system. But things have changed now, yeah. But I think we will be quite liberal. But I don't have a country if I can make a law. Yes. You come to Tibet when it becomes free, so I'll be the first one to sign, including allowing transgender to serve in the military.
The Canberra Times.
G'day, thanks very much. Nick Stewart from the Canberra Times. You made the comment about Deng saying that China will be a democracy in 50 years. I don't think she has said the same thing. And so I was wondering, given that we as Australians have to deal with China the way we find it, what, again, as Peter Harcher said earlier on, how have your relationships actually made any difference? You've arrived here, and yet the government will not see you. There seems to be no openness, even less openness than there was under, say, Prime Minister Howard towards Tibet. Now we seem to be going very much along the Beijing path. What will change? What can ever make it different? What will make China into a East Timor that actually gets independent again? Because many people just can't see that happening.
I know, but in the last 4 years, the National Press Club has not changed. So I'll keep coming till it's open so that through this forum, we'll reach out to as many Australian people as possible. And, I'm part of the freedom struggle. I'm seeking freedom, but it's a struggle. So on a daily basis, it's a struggle. It's a really apt word. So I should define my role as a struggle, then keep struggling till you reach the final destination, which I believe will reach. Because, who would have thought that the Berlin Wall will come down, Soviet Union will collapse? A year before Nelson Mandela got released, the obituaries were written about him. Oh, forget about restoring democracy in South Africa. He cannot free himself. Just 3 years ago, Aung San Suu Kyi, who would have thought she will be out of house arrest and, she'll run an election, win, and become the de facto leader of Burma. She'll walk streets of Canberra. Who would have thought? All these things happened right in front of our eyes. So I have many reasons to believe I'll succeed. Because, again, often all the journalists, good folks are here, they always ask you, realistically, rationally, do you think it's possible? But I always tell them, you all are in rational choice theory business. I'm in irrational choice theory business. By the way, in the likes of Nelson Mandela and Gandhi, and fighting against all odds. You mentioned East Timor. I have met Ramos Horta, who is the leader of East Timor. He told me, actually, that once he got an invitation from Midwest in America, and he changed 3 flights and got there, suddenly he found 3 people in a cafeteria, they want to know about East Timor. So he could have just given up then and there. It's an impossible thing, right? But he succeeded. So he won the Nobel Peace Prize. And we are in the same battle, irrational choice theory. You come to our side, this is very exciting, You're challenging, to transform China. The last area where democracy can be brought. If you can do that, my goodness, you change China, you change Asia, you change the world. And you change also the basic freedom of 6 million Tibetans. Doesn't that sound exciting? Because from Buddhist point of view, you are born, you die. Birth and death are 2 sides of the same coin. You can't escape. Why you live, you do something good for the humanity, good for your people, then you sleep well, you die well, right? So I'm in an exciting adventure, an impossible one, but if you make it happen, like Soviet Union, Berlin Wall, Nelson Mandela, Aung San Suu Kyi, you join the history So, Tibetan will be His Holiness Dalai Lama, and Tibetan will be not nobody. They will be somebody if we succeed. As Martin Luther King said, when I climbed the mountain top, right? When I heard the speech, I said, that's easy because we are Tibetans. We are genetically adapted in climbing mountains.
Tony Mill from the National Press Club.
That's a bit hard to follow. Tony Melville, Director of the National Press Club. I'll just take you back to your comments about the Brahmaputra River. So that's as you mentioned, the border. It's one of the borders, one of China's 14 borders. And you've got to be a bit sympathetic with China having 14 borders when we in Australia have none, effectively, no land borders. But that land border runs down that river, and China has said that it will only do run-of-water dams on the river. But it's also known as one of the least institutionalised rivers in the world. There are no rules around it. There's rules around the Nile River. There's rules around many other rivers. Do you think two things. One, do you think China will go to the negotiating table on that river and set up rules for the countries, including India and Bangladesh, and that run through it in the countless millions? And also, do you think seriously that China would not do those run-of-water dams and could actually divert the river and cause untold suffering downstream?
Yeah, the fear is that they will divert rivers because China is already facing water scarcity. Why would they not divert rivers, right? Then imagine the consequences. Your neighbors, if you divert all your neighbors' pipeline to your house, do you think, you can imagine all the neighbors, waking you up at midnight and complaining against you. But China has not signed the UN Convention of Water Sharing. So they are not bound by UN Convention. They are conveniently not signed. Even if they have signed, we recently know when Xi Jinping went to Hong Kong, he said, the UK-China treaty on one country, two system of Hong Kong is invalid now. It's a treaty. It's valid. He said, no, we refuse to abide by it. Even if they have signed it, they will not abide by it. So the real fear is that they will divert rivers and there will be major consequences with all the neighboring countries. So that's the main fear. And as far as border is concerned, recently it's been in the news, Chinese army moving into Doklam area bordering Sikkim and Bhutan. And huge news in India. Now, there's the Indian and Chinese army are not only facing at each other, they are in fact bouncing at each other. You see them. But then this is also age-old strategy. Because they said, Mao Zedong said in the 1950s, we occupy Tibet. Tibet is the palm, then we will occupy other 5 fingers. Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh, Sikkim, yes, Nepal, and Bhutan. So it's the extension of, Tungo, the Middle Kingdom, to all the neighboring countries. So hence what you see in East China Sea, South China Sea, Scarborough Island, all the neighboring countries is part of the same game plan, which started One Belt, One Road in Tibet, and you see all over. So yes, water is a major issue. In next decades, I think it will be more critical. And China sits on the water tower of Asia. And then one reason why, if we have the genuine autonomy as per Middle Way approach, you will be returning the Tibetan status as the steward or the guardian of the Tibetan plateau. And for thousands of years, we shared our water with all the neighboring countries for free. Nowadays, we buy water. Had we sold our water, we would have been one of the richest countries in the world, actually. But we followed our Buddhist principle. We respected nature. We shared our rivers. So this is the main fear of all the neighboring countries. I hope it won't happen, but that's the fear.
And we'll finish with our spiritual father, Ken. That's you.
Doctor, could I take you back to the question of Tibetan culture? The figures you mentioned today are really quite dramatic. How effective is the Chinese policy being in undermining Tibetan culture? How resilient do you think it is, and how is it standing up?
I think that's a good question from spiritual father, because spiritually speaking, yes, Chinese army did destroy 98% of monasteries and nunneries. 99.9% monks were disrobed. But now in Tibet, Buddhism is back, Tibetan culture is back, Tibetan language is back voluntarily. asserted by Tibetans. So Chinese government systematically discouraged Tibetan language. For example, high school, college level, medium of instruction is Chinese, not Tibetan. Even Tibetan history and Tibetan astronomy is taught in Chinese. They're encouraging. So, but Tibetans on our own, in exile, after His Holiness Dalai Lama fled to India, we rebuilt and revived Buddhism, Buddhist monasteries in exile. And then Buddhism has spread all over the Western countries, including in Australia. And also the Buddhism has revived in the Himalayan belt, Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, all this Himalayan belt, Buddhism has been revived. So our plan was that Buddhism is destroyed in Tibet, revived among exiled Tibetans so that we can take it back. And if not ourselves, then we will outsource it to all the people in the Himalayan region, because they can cross the mountains and revive Buddhism. Now, technically, it's very difficult. And all the Buddhist centers around the world, they've been going inside Tibet and reviving Buddhism. Now, Buddhism has been revived in Tibet. Now, China, oddly, is also the largest Buddhist country in the world. 300 million to 400 million are Buddhist. So I'm sure Mao Zedong is rolling in his grave thinking, my goodness, I destroyed Buddhism in Tibet. Instead, Buddhism has spread to China. So that way, that also gives us the strength, because communism is 100 plus years old. Right? Which are the communist countries left now? North Korea, Cuba barely, Yemen barely, Vietnam only in name. But Tibetan civilization, identity and culture is based on Buddhism, which is 2,500 years old. There is no competition between 100 years old communism and 2,600 years old Buddhism, right? So Buddhism will be there for 2,500 years, and Tibet will be there, Tibetan people will be there after communism is long gone. So in the long run, we will win, because our culture is based on Buddhist civilization. So that, we believe, will happen. And China will also be more lean towards Buddhism, because there are more Buddhists in China than Communist Party members, which is only 82 million. So in that sense, civilizational point of view, philosophical, spiritual point of view, we have already won. Now we have to get back to Tibet, and we will get there soon, and the aspirations of the Tibetan people inside Tibet will be fulfilled. That is, they want to see His Holiness Dalai Lama in Lhasa, the capital city, in the Potala Palace, where he belongs. And I would like to see millions of Tibetans surrounding the Potala Palace and getting blessed by him. That will be the history of the world, history of Asia. That will be the victory of nonviolence. That will be the victory of spirituality. So sooner than later, let's march together. It's a short march, so let's carry on this good march, and we will prevail. Thank you very much.
Dr. Sangay, so it should say that each time we have someone from Hong Kong come to speak to us, or someone from Tibet come to speak to us, we get the same warning, which is that we will never get anyone from China to come to speak to us at this press club, which is a pity, because we would hope to hear their worldview as we hope to hear yours. And as long as I'm on this board and our board members are here, and I'm sure the ones that come after us, you will always be welcome to speak about your cause at this club. So thank you very much for coming today. This is a book that was written by one of our directors. It was put together from speeches at the press club, the best speeches that we've had in the last 50 years. You'll see that Dalai Lama is right at the centre. Yes. He's actually between Margaret Thatcher and Kevin Rudd. I don't know what that means, but let's take it as a good sign. Here's a membership to our press club, so that you can come back anytime you wish.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
This is a special one for the file. This is forever. Lovely.